The iron-jawed mountain man with shoulders like granite boulders watched the merchant's fat fingers close around the girl's thin wrist, and something ancient and protective stirred in his chest. Russell Zane had come down from his timber claim in the high country above Trinity, Texas, needing supplies for the coming autumn of 1878, but he had not expected to witness such cruelty in the dusty mercantile that afternoon. The girl could not have been more than 19 or 20. Her dress faded and patched in a dozen places, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins as she struggled against the shopkeeper's grip. "I saw you put that bread in your apron," the merchant bellowed, his face purple with righteous indignation. "Thief! Someone fetch the marshal, please," the girl whispered, her voice breaking. "I was just looking at it. I put it back." Russell's keen gray eyes had been on her the whole time, watching as she had indeed picked up the small loaf, held it with such longing that it made his chest ache, and then carefully returned it to the basket. He had seen hunger before, recognized it in the hollow of her cheeks and the way her hand had trembled as she touched the bread. "Let her go," Russell said, his deep voice cutting through the commotion like an axe through pine. The merchant looked up, his piggy eyes widening as he took in Russell's full measure. 6'4" of solid muscle, arms thick as fence posts from years of felling trees and hauling lumber, chest broad enough to block out the sun, and a mane of dark brown hair that fell past his collar. Russell wore buckskin pants and a worn cotton shirt that strained across his shoulders, and the knife at his belt was not for show. "This does not concern you, Zane," the merchant said, but his voice had lost some of its bluster. "It does now." Russell crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, and the merchant released the girl's wrist as if it had burned him. "How much for the bread? She is a thief." "How much?" the merchant swallowed. 5 cents. Russell dug into his pocket and pulled out a silver coin, slapping it on the counter with enough force to make the merchant jump. "That is for the bread and whatever else she needs. Fill a basket. Flour, bacon, beans, coffee, sugar, dried fruit. Enough for 2 weeks. "Now see here," Russell leaned forward, and though he did not raise his voice, there was something in his eyes that made grown men step back. "Fill the basket." The girl stood frozen, her green eyes wide with shock and something that might have been hope. Up close, Russell could see the dirt smudged on her cheekbone, the way her lips were chapped from sun and wind, and the proud tilt of her chin despite her circumstances. She was beautiful in the way wildflowers were beautiful, resilient and bright despite growing in hard soil. The merchant scurried around the store, filling a large wicker basket with goods, muttering under his breath but not daring to protest further. The other customers watched in silence, some with disapproval, others with quiet admiration. Russell ignored them all, his attention fixed on the girl who seemed too stunned to speak. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Amelia," she said after a moment. "Amelia Anderson. I am Russell Zane. You got family in Trinity?" Her face closed like a door slamming shut. "No." The single word held a world of pain, and Russell recognized that too. He had seen his share of loss in his 32 years. The merchant set the overflowing basket on the counter with a thud. Russell handed it to Amelia, noting how her arms shook under the weight. She was stronger than she looked, he could tell, but hunger had sapped her strength. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "I will pay you back, I swear it. I am not a thief." "I know you are not." Russell picked up his own supplies, a smaller bundle of basics. "Come on. You look like you have not eaten in days." "I cannot." "You can, and you will." He gentled his tone, aware that he could be intimidating without meaning to be. "I have a table that needs company and food that will go to waste if someone does not help me eat it." "Will not take no for an answer." Amelia looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. All right. They walked out of the mercantile together into the late afternoon sunshine. Trinity was not a large town, just a dusty collection of wooden buildings clustered along the banks of the Trinity River in East Texas. The September heat still lingered, though the worst of summer had passed. Cottonwood trees lined the river, their leaves beginning to turn gold at the edges. Russell had left his horse, a big roan gelding named Tracker, tied outside the general store. He loaded his supplies into the saddlebags and then looked at Amelia, who stood clutching her basket like a lifeline. "My cabin is about 5 miles up into the pine country," he said. "Tracker can carry both of us and the supplies. That agreeable to you?" Amelia bit her lip. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." He swung up into the saddle with the easy grace of a man who had spent half his life on horseback, then reached down. "Come on, take my hand." After a heartbeat of hesitation, Amelia set the basket carefully in front of the saddle and placed her small hand in his. Russell pulled her up behind him as if she weighed nothing at all, settling her on the back of the saddle. She gasped softly, then wrapped one arm around his waist to steady herself, the other holding the basket. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Russell. He could feel the warmth of her body against his back, the way she fit against him as if she belonged there. He nudged Tracker into a walk, heading north out of town toward the thick pine forests that covered the hills. They rode in silence for the first mile, following a well-worn trail that climbed steadily upward. The town fell away behind them, replaced by towering pines and the song of cicadas. The air cooled as they climbed, carrying the sharp scent of pine resin and leaf mold. "Why did you help me?" Amelia finally asked, her voice soft near his ear. "Because you needed help," Russell said simply. "Most people would not have done what you did." "I am not most people." She was quiet for a moment. "No, I suppose you are not." Russell guided Tracker around a fallen log and up a steeper section of trail. "How long since you ate?" "2 days. Maybe 3. I lose track sometimes." His jaw tightened. "What happened to your family?" He felt her stiffen behind him. "My parents died of fever last winter. My brother went west to California 6 months ago, said he would send for me when he struck gold. I have not heard from him since. And you have been alone in Trinity all this time." "I had work at the hotel for a while, washing linens, scrubbing floors." "But the owner's son." She trailed off, and Russell felt a surge of anger at what she left unsaid. "I left. I have been trying to find work since, but no one wants to hire a girl with no family and no references." "That why you were hungry?" "I had a little money saved, but it ran out last week." "I have been sleeping in the old barn at the edge of town. I was not going to steal that bread. I swear I was not." "I believe you." And he did completely. The trail leveled out as they reached a ridge. Through the trees, Russell could see his cabin nestled in a clearing, smoke rising from the stone chimney where he had banked the fire that morning. It was a solid structure, built with his own hands from pine logs, with a steep roof to shed snow and a wide porch that faced east to catch the sunrise. Behind the cabin was a well-tended vegetable garden, a small barn where he kept Tracker and the milk cow, and a chicken coop. Split rail fences marked the boundaries of his cleared land. Beyond that, the forest stretched for miles in every direction, wild and untamed. Amelia drew in a sharp breath. "You built all this. Took me 3 years." Russell felt a flicker of pride. "It is not much, but it is home. It is beautiful." He dismounted and helped her down, his hand spanning her waist. She was light as a bird, and when her feet touched the ground, she swayed slightly. Russell steadied her, frowning. "When is the last time you had water?" "This morning. From the river." He shook his head and guided her toward the cabin, leaving the supplies for the moment. The interior was dim and cool. One large room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, a rope bed in the corner covered with quilts, and shelves lined with books and supplies. It was clean and orderly, the home of a man who valued simple comfort. Russell pulled out a chair. "Sit." Amelia sank into it gratefully while he dipped water from the bucket by the door and poured her a cup. She drank it in long gulps, then another, and then a third before she finally set the cup down. "Slowly," Russell cautioned. "Your stomach needs to adjust." He stirred up the coals in the fireplace and added wood, then set a cast iron pan on the hook to heat. From the cold box on the north wall, he pulled out bacon and eggs. Amelia watched him move around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, slicing bacon, cracking eggs into a bowl. "I can help," she said, starting to rise. "You can sit and rest." His tone was firm but kind. "You have been through enough today." The bacon began to sizzle and pop in the pan, filling the cabin with a mouth-watering aroma. Russell scrambled the eggs in bacon grease, added salt and pepper, then cut thick slices from a loaf of bread he had baked 2 days earlier. He set a plate in front of Amelia, piled high with food, and watched as her eyes welled with tears. "Hey now," he said, alarmed. "What is wrong?" "Nothing." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Everything is wrong, but this is the first kindness anyone has shown me in so long that I—" She could not finish, but she did not need to. Russell pulled up the other chair and sat across from her. "Eat. Then you can tell me everything if you want to." Amelia ate slowly at first, then faster, as if afraid the food might disappear. Russell ate his own portion, giving her time to satisfy the worst of her hunger. When she finally set down her fork, having cleaned her plate completely, she looked more alive than she had in town. Color had returned to her cheeks and some of the shadows had lifted from her eyes. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." She folded her hands in her lap, suddenly shy. "I do not know how to repay you for all this." "You do not need to repay me." "But I do. I am not a charity case." Russell leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I can see that. You have pride, and that is good, but everyone needs help sometimes, Amelia. Even stubborn mountain men like me." A tiny smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Is that what you are, a mountain man? Some call me that. I trap in the winter, log in the summer, keep to myself most of the year. Suits me fine." "It sounds lonely." "It is peaceful." He paused. "Though I will admit, having someone at my table makes it feel more like a home." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with something neither of them was ready to name yet. Amelia looked down at her hands and Russell cleared his throat. "You need a place to stay," he said. "I have the room. You can take the bed and I will sleep on the porch. It is still warm enough at night." "I cannot take your bed." "You can and you will. In the morning, if you are feeling stronger, you can help around the place if it makes you feel better about staying." "God knows I could use help with the garden and the preserving. I am no hand at that sort of thing." Amelia looked up at him, her green eyes searching his face again. "You are a strange man, Russell Zane, so I have been told. Why are you really doing this? You do not know me, I could be anyone." Russell was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. "My mother died when I was young. My father raised me and my sister on his own, worked himself to death doing it. When he passed, my sister and I had no one. A family took us in, fed us, gave us a roof. I never forgot that kindness. My sister married well, lives in St. Louis now with a good husband. I came out here because I wanted space to breathe, but I did not forget where I came from." He met her eyes steadily. "When I saw you in that store, scared and hungry and alone, I saw my sister. I saw myself. And I knew I could not walk away. Simple as that." Amelia's expression softened, and for the first time since he had met her, she truly smiled. It transformed her face, made her radiant despite the dirt and the worn dress. "You are a good man." "I am just a man. Now you need rest. Come on." He stood and offered his hand again. Amelia took it, letting him guide her to the bed in the corner. The quilts were clean and soft, made by his sister years ago. He pulled back the covers. "Sleep as long as you need. I will be outside if you need anything." Amelia kicked off her worn boots and climbed into the bed, sighing as she sank into the mattress. "This is heaven." Russell grabbed a blanket from the shelf and headed for the door, but her voice stopped him. "Russell, yes, thank you for everything. For seeing me when everyone else just looked away." His throat tightened. "You are easy to see, Amelia." He stepped out onto the porch and closed the door softly behind him, giving her privacy. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Russell settled into the rocking chair he had built last spring and let out a long breath. What had he gotten himself into? He had lived alone for 5 years, content with his solitude, his books, his work. He had not counted on a green-eyed girl with auburn hair and a spine of steel walking into his life and turning everything upside down. But as he sat there watching the stars come out, listening to the distant call of an owl, he found he did not regret it. Not one bit. Inside the cabin, Amelia lay in the most comfortable bed she had felt in months, her stomach full for the first time in days, and tried to understand what had happened. She had expected the worst when the merchant grabbed her, had prepared herself for jail or worse. Instead, a mountain man with gentle eyes and a protective streak had swept in and changed everything. Russell Zane was unlike any man she had ever met. He was massive, built like an oak tree, with hands that could probably snap a man in half. But those same hands had cooked for her with surprising tenderness, had helped her onto his horse with care, had offered her his own bed without expecting anything in return. She had learned to be wary of men, especially after what had happened at the hotel. But Russell was different. She could feel it in her bones. Amelia closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under like a river current. For the first time in months, she felt safe. And that was worth more than all the gold in California. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of coffee. Amelia woke slowly, confused for a moment about where she was, then remembered everything in a rush. She sat up, noting that pale sunlight streamed through the cabin's windows. She had slept through the night and into the morning. The cabin was empty, but she could hear movement outside. Amelia climbed out of bed, wincing at her rumpled dress. She found a wash basin on the stand by the door, filled with clean water and a cloth folded neatly beside it. She washed her face and hands, tried to tame her hair, then ventured outside. Russell was at the wood pile, shirtless, splitting logs with an axe. Amelia froze on the porch, her mouth going dry. She had known he was strong, but seeing him like this, muscles rippling under sun-bronzed skin with each swing of the axe, sweat gleaming on his shoulders and chest, was something else entirely. His hair was tied back with a leather thong, and the morning light caught the sharp planes of his face. He noticed her and lowered the axe, reaching for the shirt he had draped over the fence. "Morning, you sleep well, yes." Her voice came out slightly breathless and she cleared her throat. "Better than I have in ages." Russell pulled on his shirt, much to her mixed disappointment and relief. "There is coffee on the fire inside and I left some biscuits warming. Help yourself." "Thank you," she hesitated. "Can I help with anything?" "The chickens need feeding if you are up for it. Feed is in the barrel by the coop." Amelia nodded and went to find the feed. The chickens were fat and healthy, clucking contentedly as she scattered grain for them. She collected eggs from the nests, finding 7 good ones, and brought them back to the cabin in the basket provided. Russell had finished with the wood and was washing at the pump behind the cabin. Amelia tried not to stare at the way the water ran down his neck and arms, the way his muscles bunched and relaxed as he scrubbed. She focused on the eggs instead, bringing them inside and setting them carefully in the bowl on the table. By the time Russell came in, Amelia had poured coffee for both of them and was eating a biscuit with butter and jam. He settled into the chair across from her, cupping his coffee mug in both hands. "You did not have to feed the chickens," he said. "You are a guest. I want to earn my keep." "You said I could help." "I did say that." He took a sip of coffee. "Can you sew?" "Yes, my mother taught me. I have a pile of shirts and pants that need mending, buttons missing, tears, that sort of thing. I am terrible with a needle. I can do that easily." Amelia felt a surge of relief. Sewing was something she could do, something useful. "Anything else?" "The garden needs harvesting. Tomatoes, beans, squash, all coming ripe at once. I have been trying to keep up, but it is more than one person can handle, and I have no idea how to preserve things properly. My food stores for winter are pathetic." Amelia's mind was already working. "I can help with that. My mother taught me to can vegetables and make preserves. We will need jars and lids, though. I have a whole box of them in the barn. Bought them 2 years ago with good intentions, but they just sit there mocking me." She laughed, surprised by how good it felt. "Then we have work to do." They spent the day in companionable labor. Russell worked on repairs to the barn roof, while Amelia surveyed the garden and made lists of what needed to be done. The garden was impressive, much larger than she had realized, with neat rows of vegetables and herbs. Russell had clearly put significant effort into it, even if he lacked the knowledge to preserve the harvest. At midday, Amelia made a simple meal of cold meat, cheese, and bread. They ate on the porch, watching clouds build over the distant hills. "There is a storm coming," Russell said, studying the sky. "Tomorrow, maybe the day after. Will it be bad? Depends. September storms can be fierce, but they pass quick." He glanced at her. "You do not need to worry. The cabin is solid." Amelia believed him. Everything about Russell spoke of competence and strength. She felt safer here in the wilderness with him than she had in town surrounded by people. That evening, Russell showed her the mending pile. It was even larger than she had expected, and she set to work immediately, sorting items by what needed to be done. Russell settled by the fire with a book, and they worked in peaceful silence broken only by the crackle of flames and the occasional turn of a page. Amelia found herself stealing glances at him. In the firelight, his face seemed softer, younger. She noticed he had a small scar above his left eyebrow, another on his jaw. Working man's scars, badges of a hard life lived honestly. "What are you reading?" she asked after a while. Russell held up the book. "Shakespeare, Much Ado About Nothing." "You read Shakespeare?" She could not keep the surprise from her voice. "My mother was a school teacher before she married. She taught me to love books." He smiled, a little self-consciously. "People assume because I live in the woods and swing an axe for a living that I am ignorant. I am not." "I did not mean, I know. No offense taken." He set the book aside. "Do you read?" "I used to. I have not had access to books in a long time. You are welcome to any of mine. I have 2 shelves full." Amelia looked at the shelves, seeing titles she recognized and many she did not. "I would like that very much." As the days passed, they fell into a rhythm. Russell worked on his land during the day, chopping wood, maintaining fences, hunting for meat. Amelia tackled the garden and the preserving with focused energy, grateful to have purpose again. She mended his clothes, cooked meals, cleaned the cabin. She insisted on sleeping on a pallet on the floor, and Russell finally agreed when she threatened to sleep in the barn instead. but it was more than just work. They talked over meals, shared stories in the evenings. Russell told her about his childhood in Missouri, his years trapping in the Rockies, the events that had led him to this land. Amelia spoke of her family, her parents' goodness, her brother's betrayal of his promise, the lonely months after they were gone. Russell learned that Amelia loved to sing, that she had a quick wit and a sharp mind, that she could identify birds by their calls and knew the medicinal properties of dozens of plants. Amelia discovered that Russell was quieter than most men but not silent, that he had strong opinions about literature and politics, that he played the harmonica beautifully on warm evenings. The storm Russell had predicted rolled in on the third night, lashing the cabin with rain and wind. Amelia lay on her pallet listening to thunder shake the walls and tried not to be frightened. When a particularly loud crack made her gasp, Russell's voice came from the darkness. "You all right?" "Yes, just startled. The cabin has weathered worse. We are safe." Something about his calm certainty soothed her fears. "Russell, are you awake?" Obviously. She could hear the smile in his voice. "Tell me something, anything." So he did. He told her about the first time he saw the Rocky Mountains, how they had stolen his breath and made him feel small and infinite all at once. He told her about tracking a wounded bear for 3 days through snow, about nearly drowning in a river crossing, about the time he had eaten nothing but pine bark for a week when a blizzard trapped him in a cave. His deep voice washed over her like a lullaby, and Amelia found her eyes growing heavy. The storm faded into background noise, less frightening with Russell's presence filling the darkness. "Amelia," he said softly, "thank you for being here. I did not realize how quiet it had gotten until you filled it with noise again." She smiled in the darkness. "You are welcome." A week after Amelia arrived, Russell had to make a supply run to town. He asked if she wanted to come, but she declined, not ready to face Trinity and its judgment again. He left at dawn and promised to be back before dark. Amelia spent the day working in the garden, harvesting the last of the tomatoes. She had made remarkable progress with the preserving, and the pantry now held rows of gleaming jars filled with vegetables, fruits, and jams. It gave her deep satisfaction to see the results of her labor. She was hauling water from the well when she heard a horse approaching. For a moment, her heart leaped, thinking Russell had returned early. But the rider who emerged from the tree line was not Russell. It was a young man, maybe 25, with slicked back hair and expensive clothes that seemed out of place in the wilderness. Amelia recognized him immediately and felt ice form in her stomach. Daniel Morrison, the hotel owner's son. "Well, well," Daniel said, dismounting. "So this is where you ran off to. I have been looking for you, Amelia. You need to leave." Amelia's voice was steady despite her fear. "That is no way to greet an old friend." Daniel stepped closer, and she could smell whiskey on his breath. "You owe me, you know. You left without giving notice cost my father money. Your father knows why I left. Tell him to stay away from me and tell him the same for yourself." Daniel's expression hardened. "You always did have a smart mouth. Maybe it is time someone taught you some manners." He lunged for her, but Amelia was ready. She swung the water bucket with all her strength, catching him in the shoulder. Water drenched him, and he stumbled back with a curse. "You little witch!" Amelia dropped the bucket and ran for the cabin, her heart pounding. She made it through the door and slammed it shut, throwing the bolt Russell had installed. Daniel pounded on the wood, shouting obscenities. "Open this door!" "No, leave or I will shoot you." She had no gun, but Daniel did not know that. "Russell Zane's whore now, are you? Wonder what he will think when I tell him what you really are." Amelia's hands shook as she looked around for a weapon. There was the rifle above the fireplace, but she had no idea if it was loaded or how to fire it. She grabbed the poker from the hearth instead, gripping it like a club. The pounding stopped suddenly. Amelia pressed her ear to the door, listening. Had he given up? She heard his hoarse whinny, then retreating hoofbeats. She sagged against the door in relief, but did not move from her spot. 2 hours later, she heard another horse approaching and nearly cried with relief when Russell's voice called out, "Amelia, why is the door bolted?" She fumbled with the bolt and pulled the door open. Russell took one look at her face and his expression turned thunderous. What happened? Amelia told him everything, the words tumbling out. Russell listened in silence, his jaw growing tighter with each sentence. When she finished, he put his hands on her shoulders, gentle but firm. "Did he hurt you?" "No. I hit him with the water bucket and locked myself inside." A flicker of something that might have been pride crossed Russell's face. "Good, but he will not bother you again. I will make sure of it. Russell, please do not do anything foolish. He is not worth it. I will not kill him if that is what you are worried about. But he needs to understand that you are under my protection now, and I do not take that lightly." The way he said it, with such absolute conviction, made Amelia's breath catch. "Why are you doing all this for me? Really?" Russell looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "Because the thought of something happening to you makes me want to tear down mountains. Because you have been here less than 2 weeks, and already this cabin feels empty when you are not in it. Because I wake up every morning looking forward to seeing your smile." He paused, then continued more quietly. "Because I am falling for you, Amelia Anderson, and I have been since the moment I saw you standing up to that merchant with your chin high and your eyes flashing fire." Amelia's heart hammered in her chest. "Russell, you do not have to say anything. I know it is too soon and you have been through hell, but I needed you to know. You are not just some charity case or obligation. You are important to me. You matter." Without thinking, Amelia closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. Russell froze for a heartbeat, then his arms came around her, holding her close. He smelled like pine and leather and something uniquely him, and Amelia felt safer than she had in her entire life. "I am falling too," she whispered. "It terrifies me." "Why?" "Because everything good in my life gets taken away." Russell's arms tightened around her. "I am not going anywhere. And I will not let anyone take you away either." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other as the sun set and the stars came out. When they finally pulled apart, something fundamental had shifted between them. The next morning, Russell rode to town. He found Daniel Morrison at the hotel and invited him outside with a politeness that was somehow more threatening than any shout. What was said between them, Russell never told Amelia, but Daniel left Trinity the next day for parts unknown, and the hotel owner was suddenly eager to spread word that Amelia had been a model employee who left due to no fault of her own. September gave way to October, and the days grew shorter and cooler. The relationship between Russell and Amelia deepened, built on shared work and quiet evenings and moments of laughter that became more frequent. They were careful with each other, both aware of the fragile, precious thing growing between them. Russell taught Amelia to shoot, patiently instructing her in how to hold the rifle, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger. She proved a natural shot, much to his pride. Amelia taught Russell the finer points of cooking and preserving, and together they put up enough food to last through 2 winters. They went riding through the hills, Russell showing her the secret places he had discovered in his years on the mountain. A waterfall hidden in a rocky canyon. A meadow where deer came to graze at dawn. A lightning-struck oak that had fallen to form a natural bridge across a stream. In the evenings, they sat close on the porch, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. Russell played his harmonica while Amelia sang, their voices blending in old hymns and folk songs. He had never been happier. It was on a crisp October evening, with the first frost whitening the grass, that things changed again. They were sitting by the fire after supper, Russell reading while Amelia worked on embroidering a new shirt for him. She looked up and found him watching her, something intense and tender in his gaze. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them. Amelia's needle stilled, her eyes going wide. "What?" Russell set his book aside and moved to kneel in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "Marry me, Amelia. I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but I have never been more certain of anything. You belong here. You belong with me. I want to wake up to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. Marry me." Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "I have nothing to bring to a marriage. No dowry, no family, no, you are all I want. You are all I need." Russell reached up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. "I love you, Amelia. I know I should have said it before proposing, but I am doing this all backwards. I love you more than I have words for. You have made me happier in these past weeks than I have been in years. Say yes, please say yes." "Yes," Amelia breathed. "Yes, Russell, I love you too. Yes, I will marry you." Russell pulled her from the chair and kissed her, and it was like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. Amelia's hands tangled in his long hair and his arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her clear off the floor. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Russell rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this right," he said. "Proper wedding, proper everything. You deserve that. I just want you. You have me. You have had me since Trinity." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Trinity, with half the town in attendance. Word had spread about the mountain man and the girl he had saved, and public opinion had firmly turned in their favor. Amelia wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton that Russell had bought from the mercantile, along with a length of white ribbon for her hair. Russell wore his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly trimmed, looking uncomfortable but determined in his Sunday clothes. The ceremony was short and sweet, conducted by the traveling preacher who passed through Trinity once a month. When Russell slipped the simple gold band onto Amelia's finger and kissed her as his wife, there was not a dry eye in the church. They rode back to the cabin in the late afternoon, Amelia seated in front of Russell on Tracker, his arms around her waist. The October sun painted everything in golden light, and the pine trees whispered in the breeze. "Happy?" Russell asked, his lips close to her ear, deliriously. Amelia leaned back against his broad chest. "I cannot believe this is my life now." "Believe it. You are stuck with me, Mrs. Zane. Good. I would not want to be anywhere else." That night, in the cabin they now shared as husband and wife, Russell was gentle and patient, making sure Amelia's first time was filled with tenderness and care. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, the fire burning low, and talked until the early hours of morning about their hopes and dreams for the future. The first winter of their marriage was hard but good. Snow fell deep in the high country, and there were days when they were completely isolated, unable to leave the cabin. But they had plenty of food, plenty of firewood, and most importantly, they had each other. Russell taught Amelia to read tracks in the snow and set trap lines. Amelia taught Russell to knit, though he proved terrible at it, and they both laughed until their sides hurt at his lopsided attempts. They made love by firelight and starlight, learning each other's bodies and hearts with growing confidence. When spring came and the snow melted, Amelia helped Russell with the logging work. She could not handle the massive trees he felled, but she could limb branches and help load the wagon. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, then fell into bed exhausted and happy. It was in late April that Amelia realized her monthly courses had not come in 6 weeks. She said nothing at first, wanting to be sure, but when another week passed, she could no longer contain her joy. She waited until dinner was finished and they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Russell had his arm around her shoulders and she was nestled against his side. "Russell, I have something to tell you." He sounded half asleep, content in the warm evening. "I am with child." Russell went very still. Then he pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes wide. "Truly." "Truly. The baby should come in early December, I think." A slow smile spread across Russell's face, transforming him. "A baby, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Amelia asked, though she could see the answer in his face. Happy does not begin to cover it. Russell cupped her face in his hands and kissed her soundly. "You have given me everything, Amelia, everything I never knew I needed. And you saved me. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other." The months of Amelia's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation. Russell built a cradle from cherry wood, sanding it smooth and carving delicate designs into the headboard. Amelia sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation. They argued good-naturedly about names, Russell preferring traditional choices while Amelia favored more unique options. In late November, Russell made the trip to town and returned with the midwife, Mrs. Sarah Fletcher, a capable woman in her 50s who agreed to stay at the cabin until the baby came. She arrived just in time, as Amelia's labor began 3 days later. It was a long labor, lasting from sunrise to well past midnight. Russell paced the cabin like a caged bear, desperate to help but forced to stay out of the bedroom while Mrs. Fletcher tended to his wife. Every cry of pain from Amelia cut him like a knife, and he found himself praying to a God he had not spoken to in years. Finally, in the dark hours of the morning, a baby's cry pierced the night. Russell's head snapped up, his heart in his throat. Mrs. Fletcher emerged a few minutes later, smiling broadly. "You have a son, Mr. Zane, strong and healthy, and your wife did beautifully." Russell was through the door before she finished speaking. Amelia lay in the bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up as he entered, tears streaming down her face. "Russell, meet your son." Russell approached slowly, almost reverently. The baby was tiny, red-faced and squalling with a shock of dark hair. When Amelia pulled the blanket back, Russell saw perfect tiny fingers, miniature toes, a nose that was clearly his. "He is perfect," Russell whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You are perfect. Can I hold him?" Amelia carefully transferred the baby to his arms. Russell cradled his son with surprising gentleness for such a large man, and the baby quieted almost immediately, as if recognizing his father's touch. "Hello, little one. I am your papa. I am going to teach you everything I know. I am going to keep you safe and loved every day of your life." Russell looked up at Amelia, his eyes bright with unshed tears. What should we name him? They had finally agreed on a name weeks earlier after much debate. "Robert," Amelia said. "Robert James Zane." "Robert James Zane," Russell repeated, testing it out. "Welcome to the world, Bobby, Mrs. Fletcher stayed for a week to ensure Amelia recovered properly, then returned to town with a generous payment and an invitation to visit any time. Russell and Amelia were left to navigate parenthood on their own, learning as they went. Bobby proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong like his father. Russell was a devoted father, taking turns with the night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, singing to his son in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. Amelia watched her husband with their child and fell even more deeply in love. The years that followed were full and rich. Bobby grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious boy who followed his father everywhere and helped his mother in the garden. When Bobby was 3, Amelia gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, who had her mother's green eyes and auburn hair. Russell expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms as the family grew. He taught Bobby to ride and hunt and track. Amelia taught Rose to cook and sew and recognize medicinal plants. Both children learned to read from their parents' collection of books, and the cabin rang with laughter and life. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, Russell and Amelia would sit on the porch as they had since the beginning, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. They would talk about their day, their children, their dreams for the future. "You ever regret it?" Russell asked one night when Bobby was 7 and Rose was 4. "Ending up here with me instead of having a more civilized life?" Amelia looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the stars. "Not for one single second. You gave me everything that matters. Love, family, home, purpose. What more could I want? I just want you to be happy. I am, deliriously, completely happy." She paused. "Do you regret helping me that day in Trinity?" Russell's arm tightened around her. "That was the best decision I ever made. The day I saw you in that mercantile was the day my real life began." When Bobby turned 8, Russell took him on his first overnight hunting trip, a rite of passage into boyhood. They returned 3 days later with 2 deer and countless stories. Bobby was sunburned and exhausted, and happier than Amelia had ever seen him. Rose, not to be outdone, insisted on learning to shoot when she turned 6. Russell patiently taught her as he had taught Amelia, and Rose proved to have her mother's natural accuracy. She could hit a target at 50 yards by the time she was 8, much to her father's pride. As the children grew, Russell and Amelia grew too, not apart but deeper together. They knew each other's rhythms, anticipated each other's needs, communicated in glances and touches as much as words. Their love had been forged in crisis and tempered by time into something unbreakable. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Russell surprised Amelia by taking her back to Trinity for the night. They stayed at the hotel, much improved under new management after old man Morrison had passed on, and had dinner at the restaurant. Amelia wore a new dress Russell had secretly commissioned, deep green to match her eyes. As they walked through town after dinner, hand in hand, Amelia realized how much had changed. Trinity had grown, adding new buildings and families. But more importantly, she had changed. The frightened, hungry girl who had been accused of stealing bread was gone, replaced by a confident woman who knew her worth and her place in the world. "What are you thinking?" Russell asked, ever attuned to her moods. "I am thinking about that day you saved me. How different my life would be if you had not stepped in." "I did not save you. You saved yourself. I just gave you a safe place to do it." "No, Russell, you saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when everyone else saw trash. You loved me when I could not love myself. That is saving someone." Russell stopped walking and turned to face her, there on the main street of Trinity under the stars. "And you made me whole. I did not even know I was broken until you fixed me. You brought light and laughter and love into my life. You gave me children, gave me purpose beyond just surviving. We saved each other, Amelia. That is what we do." They kissed there in the street, and if anyone saw, neither of them cared. The years continued to pass, marked by growth and change. Bobby grew tall and strong like his father, eventually standing eye to eye with Russell by the time he was 16. Rose grew beautiful and fierce, with a quick mind and a kind heart. They were good children, growing into good people, and Russell and Amelia were endlessly proud. When Bobby was 17, a girl from town caught his eye, a sweet thing named Emily who helped her father at the general store. Russell watched his son court her with the same intensity he had once courted Amelia, and he felt the bittersweet passage of time. "He is going to leave us," Russell said one night after Bobby had ridden to town to see Emily again. "Not leave us, grow up. It is what we raised him to do." Amelia took his hand. "And we will still have Rose, and each other. Always each other." Bobby married Emily when he was 19, and Russell helped him build a cabin on the far side of their property. It was hard watching his son leave the nest, but Russell consoled himself with the knowledge that Bobby was staying close and that he had found the same kind of love Russell had found. Rose, independent and adventurous, declared her intention to become a schoolteacher and went to study in San Antonio when she was 18. It nearly broke Amelia's heart to see her daughter leave, but they were both proud of her ambition. With the children grown and gone, Russell and Amelia found themselves alone again for the first time in 20 years. The cabin seemed too quiet, too empty. But slowly, they rediscovered the rhythms of their early days together. They took long rides through the mountains, spent whole days reading by the fire, made love in the afternoon when the mood struck them. "It is like a second honeymoon," Amelia said one morning, lying in Russell's arms as sun streamed through the window. "Better than the first one," Russell replied, running his fingers through her hair. "We know each other so much better now. Getting old with you is not so bad." "Old?" Russell propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with mock offense. "I am only 52. I am in my prime." Amelia laughed and pulled him down for a kiss. "Yes, dear, your prime." In truth, the years had been kind to Russell. His hair was threaded with silver now, and there were lines around his eyes, but he was still as strong and solid as the day Amelia had met him. She had changed, too, her auburn hair now streaked with gray, her face showing the marks of laughter and sunlight. But when Russell looked at her, he still saw the green-eyed girl in the mercantile, all fire and pride despite her fear. Bobby and Emily gave them their first grandchild, a boy named Samuel, when Amelia was 48. Holding her grandson for the first time, Amelia was overwhelmed by the continuation of the life she and Russell had built. A year later, Bobby and Emily had a daughter, Rebecca. Rose eventually married a fellow teacher and had twin boys, making Russell and Amelia the proud grandparents of 5. The cabin that had once seemed too quiet now rang with young voices again, whenever the grandchildren visited. Russell built them a swing in the big oak tree and taught them to fish in the stream. Amelia baked cookies and told stories and passed on her knowledge of plants and growing things. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the cabin for a celebration. Bobby and Emily were there with their 3 children now. Rose and her husband Thomas brought the twins. The cabin overflowed with people and noise and love. As Russell stood on the porch watching his children and grandchildren playing in the yard, he felt a hand slip into his. Amelia leaned against his shoulder, and for a moment they were alone in the crowd. "Look what we made," she said softly. "Look at this beautiful, chaotic, wonderful family." "All because you tried to buy bread," Russell replied with a smile. "All because you had the heart to help a stranger." Russell turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Amelia Zane, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. These 25 years have been the happiest of my life. I love you more today than I did when I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "You old romantic," Amelia said, but her eyes were bright with tears. "I love you too, Russell. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for saying yes." They kissed, and their children and grandchildren cheered, and the mountains echoed with the sound of joy. The years continued their march, as years always do. Russell and Amelia grew older but not weaker, their love deepening with each passing season. They remained in the cabin Russell had built, refusing all offers from their children to move somewhere easier. This was their home, the place where their life together had truly begun. Russell's hair turned fully silver, and his hands developed the tremor of age, but he still chopped wood every morning. Amelia's eyes grew weaker, and her joints ached in the cold, but she still tended her garden and preserved food each autumn. They moved slower, but they moved together. On their 40th anniversary, when Russell was 72 and Amelia was 59, they sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Their grandchildren had grown into adults now, and they had great-grandchildren, tiny beings who carried forward the legacy of that day in Trinity so long ago. 40 years, Amelia mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever. Best 40 years of my life, Russell said. His voice was rougher now, weathered by age but still strong. No regrets, no regrets, Amelia agreed. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the young mountain man beneath the gray hair and weathered skin. You know, I think about that day in the mercantile sometimes. What would have happened if you had not been there? But I was there. That is what matters. You changed everything for me. You gave me a life worth living. Russell squeezed her hand. You did the same for me. I was just existing before you, surviving. You taught me how to truly live. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one. An owl called from the forest, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sounds of the wilderness that had been the backdrop to their entire life together. Russell, Amelia said after a long while. Yes, love. When I go, whenever that is, I want you to know that I died happy, that you made every single day worth living, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. Do not talk about dying, we have years yet, maybe, but I need you to know. Russell pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder as she had done thousands of times before. I know, and when my time comes, I will go knowing the same thing. You were my greatest adventure, Amelia, my greatest love, my greatest gift. And you were mine. They remained on the porch until the moon rose, holding each other, wrapped in 40 years of shared memories and unshakable love. The mountain air was cool and sweet, filled with the scent of pine and possibility. Russell Zane and Amelia Anderson had started their journey together in crisis, bound by circumstance and chance. But they had built something eternal from that moment of connection, a love that transcended time and hardship. They had raised children, weathered storms, faced loss, and celebrated joy. And through it all, they had remained what they had been from that first day. Two people who had found each other when they both needed finding, who had chosen each other when they both needed choosing, who had loved each other with everything they had. In the years that followed, they grew even older but never apart. Russell's strength finally began to fade in his late 70s, but Amelia was there to support him as he had once supported her. When Amelia's memory started to slip in her late 60s, Russell was patient and gentle, reminding her of their story over and over until she smiled and remembered. They celebrated their 50th anniversary surrounded by 3 generations of family, the cabin bursting with life and laughter. Russell could barely stand without his cane, and Amelia needed help climbing the porch steps, but their love was as strong as the mountains that surrounded them. On a crisp October morning, when the leaves were turning gold and the air smelled of wood smoke and autumn, Russell Zane passed away peacefully in his sleep with Amelia holding his hand. He was 82 years old and had lived every day of those 82 years with purpose and passion. At his funeral, the church in Trinity was packed with family and friends. Bobby spoke about his father's strength and kindness. Rose talked about his endless patience and wisdom. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren shared stories of fishing trips and life lessons. But it was Amelia who had the final word. Standing at the front of the church, leaning heavily on Bobby's arm but with her head held high, she told the congregation about a day 52 years earlier when a mountain man with gray eyes and a kind heart had saved her life in a mercantile. "Russell saw me when I was invisible," she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "He valued me when I had nothing to offer. He loved me when I did not know how to love myself. He gave me a home, a family, a life beyond my wildest dreams. And I gave him my heart, every piece of it, for 52 years. That is what true love looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but real and lasting and worth everything." Amelia lived for 3 more years after Russell's death, long enough to see 2 more great-grandchildren born and to ensure that Rose's daughters knew how to can vegetables properly. She spent her final years in the cabin, refusing to leave despite her children's concerns. Bobby moved in with her to provide care, but Amelia insisted on tending her garden until the very end. She died on a warm spring morning, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, looking out at the mountains she had come to love. They found her with a smile on her face and Russell's old harmonica in her hands. She was 74 years old. They buried Amelia beside Russell in the small cemetery outside Trinity, under a pine tree that Russell had planted decades earlier. The headstone was simple but perfect. Russell Zane, 1846–1928, and Amelia Anderson Zane, 1854–1928. Beloved parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, 2 souls who found each other and built a legacy of love. But the true legacy of Russell and Amelia Zane was not in stone or memory. It was in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their love forward into the world. It was in the cabin that still stood strong in the mountains, now preserved by the family as a reminder of where they came from. It was in the stories told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, of the mountain man who paid for a stranger's bread and the woman who became his whole world. Their story became legend in Trinity, passed down through generations as an example of the transformative power of kindness and the enduring strength of true love. The old mercantile where it all began eventually burned down, but a plaque was placed on the site commemorating the spot where Russell Zane and Amelia Anderson first met. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the pine trees above their graves, some people swore they could hear the sound of a harmonica playing and a woman's voice singing in harmony, the 2 of them together, even in eternity, because some love stories do not end with death. Some love stories are powerful enough to echo through time, inspiring everyone who hears them to believe in the possibility of finding their own person, their own home, their own happily ever after. Russell and Amelia's story was one of those. It began with an act of compassion in a dusty mercantile, grew through shared work and quiet evenings, and blossomed into a love that created a family, built a legacy, and proved that sometimes the most extraordinary lives begin with the simplest choice to help another human being. Their descendants still gather at the cabin every year on the anniversary of that day in Trinity, keeping the memory alive. They tell the children about their great-great-grandparents, about Russell's strength and kindness, and Amelia's resilience and grace. They teach them that love is not just feeling but action, not just words but deeds, not just passion but commitment sustained across decades. And in this way, Russell and Amelia Zane continue to live on, their love story a beacon of hope and inspiration for all who hear it, a reminder that even in the darkest moments when all seems lost, sometimes salvation comes in the form of a stranger with kind eyes who sees you, truly sees you, and decides that you are worth saving. That is the legacy of the mountain man who saw them accuse her of stealing food, paid for it, and took her home to his table. That is the legacy of the woman who was brave enough to accept help and wise enough to recognize love when it found her. That is the legacy of Russell and Amelia Zane, and it will endure as long as there are hearts capable of love and souls searching for home.